can you tell us, how do you convey expectations of work, learning objectives, and how learning will be assessed when you're doing your projects for your class?
Okay, and so are we talking about, I do a bunch of different kinds of projects. So there's projects that the whole class will do together as a group, and then everybody's working on it. And then there's also like curricular projects where they take a piece of the curriculum, right, and then work on that as their own thing. So you want me to focus on one of those, or?
The curricular projects, I think. Yeah.
Okay, as opposed to like the whole class works together to build the solar panel or
Right.
the garden. Okay. So sorry, could you say the question again?
How do you convey expectations of work, learning objectives, and how learning will be assessed?
Okay. So for any given project, I'll give them sort of a sheet of expectations with the due dates for the different pieces, and I try to break it down, outline first, propose how you're going to share the information, pieces like that, and they get that at the outset. And then that usually turns into some sort of feedback form that I give them at the end. So it's the same requirements, then I write in, yes, you got this, you didn't do that, or whatever. And so sort of the expectations and the assessment are almost the same piece of paper, just word processed a little differently. And so the question was, how do I give them the expectations? How do I assess them? And it was a little piece.
And how do you determine the learning objectives for those?
Oh, so how do I decide what I would like them to get out of it? So, a lot of times my projects are to fill in a piece of the curriculum that I feel like will just work a lot better if they can each take something that they're interested in. And so I purposely pick sort of topics that are broad enough to bridge, usually like between a couple of units, so they will span over a couple different sections of the curriculum, and then they can kind of find their niche in between that. The overall objectives are always the same as far as being able to go out and research stuff on their own, usually online, being able to then cite that and vet it and make sure it's real science and not, hocus pocus stuff. And some of my projects, I explicitly ask them to find fake stuff so they can pull that in. Those are some of my favorite. Kids struggle with that.
And they can do like an example, non-example, or compare
Right.
and contrast.
And then, so the parts that are always there, right, is this being able to come back, explain to the group, and then to structure either their PowerPoint or their paper. And depending on the course and what other assignments are in there, that may change, right? So it's really sort of a way for me to grab a whole bunch of pieces into one, and then I fill the other parts out with the curriculum.
Okay, and how do you identify and develop ideas for project-based learning?
So, some of them I sort of inherited from other teachers when I first started. For example, right now my students are doing projects on genetic diseases, and that is a project that other teachers all around the country do when they teach genetics, because it's a really interesting one, and it allows them to tie in a lot of information into one concise explanation. And then other projects I've done where it's really sort of what are students coming to me with, and that usually takes a year or two to cycle into a new project, but pulling in, kids are really interested in sort of synthetic chemistry, like how do you make stuff out of chemicals, or how do you actually use them in an everyday way. That has sort of morphed into the projects I do in my chemistry class, where I'm giving them household stuff and they have to figure out what to do with them. Or cooking. Kids have always been asking questions about how the biochemistry stuff fits into cooking stuff. So now I have a huge cooking project as the capstone for a biochem class. So it's a little bit of both. There's some sort of borrowing and student interest.
And how would you explain the differences between an activity and a project?
An activity is really short. A project takes a while. And an activity I usually plan and then putting together the stuff and I'm helping the students do. Whereas a project, I'm expecting them to plan and find the pieces and bring those to me. So it's a project I think of as much more student driven.
When you're talking about a plan, what does a typical project plan include for what the students is bringing back to you?
I mean, depending on how, depends a lot on the level of class, right? I teach all the way from 7th graders sometimes up through 12th graders. So with the class that I've specifically designed for 11th and 12th graders, there I'm really just giving them, here's a standard scientific project and paper and what that would look like, and I help them get to that point. With the other classes that may include 8th graders or 9th graders, I give them very concrete, like, tell me the symptoms of the disease, and I break it down into content so they can start pulling those pieces together. And I'm always sure to leave a sort of broad category where they can pull in stories or acquaintances or personal information, because that's really where I want them to go, hopefully, but a lot of them need that structure of content pieces so they have something that they can pull off the internet and know they got what they're interested in, and then it's me helping them pull out the rest of the connections.
Is there anything else that they would do to implement their projects?
You mean besides presenting to the class?
Mm-hmm.
That's a good question. I mean, my botany class, they actually do gardening they each have a little plot right now that they're working on. And they will share those with the class too, but most of their work is actually hands-on. In my capstone class, they do write a paper as a part of their project. But for the most part, I want the other students to be able to see what each student has done. So I really try to encourage them to have a public sharing. And it means I have to take out, 3 to 4, a whole week of class time for that resharing of information. Not take out, but that's not part of my directed curriculum, right? The kids teach each other for however long that is.
And how do you typically document and report project findings?
So I take that list of expectations and I write in what the students have done and I keep a copy of that. I give them a copy and I keep a copy. And then at the end of every semester we have parent-teacher student conferences and I talk about the project there and the advisor takes notes. So then that winds up in their formal transcript, the much shortened version of this is how their project went.
Right, and that's the evaluation process then.
Yeah, so I give written feedback that way. Almost always there's a question-answer process, so there's some live feedback that can happen from students, from me, and then to the parents, it's this ultimate, here's how the project went.
How long does a typical project last then?
Try to always make them last at least a month, so they have a week or two to get their proposal outline together, another week to get some background, and then a draft, and then it takes me, partly it's because it takes me that long to get through. I mean, a class of 14 or whatever projects, it takes me a while to go through each one and get them ready to then present. And sometimes longer. And I have semester-long projects also.
Are some of those projects collaborative, or are most of them collaborative?
Sometimes. I mean, if I'm doing lab reports, they're collaborative. The gardening projects are collaborative. Often they are individual. I'm trying to think of where or why that line crosses. I think the more academic research-based ones that are, like a disease or something, those tend to be individual because kids pick their topic. Whereas the cooking and the gardening, and then, I've had other kids just collaborate if they really want to work together, but often it's individual. It's a mix.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Sure.
This is great.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
All right.
Yeah, and then there's a whole other side of how you do a project with the whole class, which is a different issue altogether. And then they're not really getting evaluated for their project, they're getting evaluated for how they contribute to the overall.
And was that the solar panels?
So the solar panel is one like that. Even within my botany class, we have a class garden that we're all working on together as opposed to each of them doing their own. There are a few other situations where I've done similar things like that. But yeah, that's the most obvious one, where it's like everybody was doing a piece.
And that was a grant, right?
That requires those sorts of things. You're usually inspired by funding, because funders like that stuff.
Right.
They want
Right.
to see
Right.
a big project that everybody comes together on.
Right. That was one of the things that my husband and I were really impressed by when we started touring the school, was that story. We're like, it's really great.
Yeah, it was a good story. There's a couple of those kids that started the original idea have come back and seen it, which has been really
One
cool.
more question.
Oh yeah.
How students report and document their project?
So it depends. They, depending on how I've sent it, usually I have them do an outline and some sort of draft. A lot of them like doing PowerPoints or Prezis, and so they have that with the notes. I make them fill in the notes sections, so they have that as their digital document, and then I keep it. I have it too. And then the assessment page, I usually have them self-evaluate and me evaluate, and they get that paper back. Occasionally I have peers evaluate, but that really depends on the class chemistry. I've had that go badly a few times, and so I don't do it all the time. I do it if I know people are going to be helpful.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you. All right.